Hey everyone, I have irrefutable proof that my wife Jenny cheated on me. A photograph of her kissing another man. Not a casual kiss or a moment of inexplicable affection. It was a kiss that spoke volumes. A kiss that gutted me. A man? I didn't recognize him, but they looked at ease, too comfortable for this to be their first kiss. My stomach went crazy as I stared at the picture, running through the life we had built together, now twisted and cracked like broken glass. But I didn't just sit there, immersed in betrayal. I devised a plan that would force Jenny to admit what she had done. It would be unexpected. I've come up with a way that will take her by surprise. It started almost a year ago. That's when I first started having doubts. Jenny's behavior changed in small, subtle ways, the kind of stuff you only notice if you're paying close attention. Every Saturday, she started going to a beauty salon on the other side of town. This struck me as odd because there's a salon just 5 minutes from our house, the same one she'd been visiting for more than 6 years. When I asked her about it, she brushed it off, saying this new place had better reviews and esthetician specialists. But it didn't end there. After the salon, she began coming home late, sometimes around midnight, saying she'd grab dinner or drinks with friends. At first, I told myself I was imagining things. We've been together since we were 19, nearly 20 years now. We built a life together, a home and a family. We have a teenage daughter, Emily, who's everything to both of us. Jenny was my best friend, my partner, the love of my life. The idea of her betraying me like that, it didn't seem possible. But then there was this one night. I remember it vividly. She came home late again, and something about her demeanor just felt off. She had this glow about her, this happiness that didn't match the exhaustion she was claiming to feel. That was the first time I let the thought cross my mind. Is she seeing someone else? I didn't say anything. Couldn't. Instead, I did what I'm guessing a lot of people in my shoes would do. I started paying attention. I checked her phone when she wasn't looking. She'd locked it, of course. I monitored her behavior, listened to her excuses, and replayed conversations in my head, searching for inconsistencies. And then, about a year later, there was this one moment I'll never forget. I kissed Jenny, a real kiss, a deep one, the kind we hadn't shared in months. And that's when I noticed it, a man's cologne. It wasn't mine, and it was subtle, like she tried to wash it off but hadn't quite succeeded. My heart was pounding as I pulled away, pretending nothing was wrong. That moment told me everything I needed to know. Here's the thing about me. I'm not impulsive. I don't fly off the handle or act without thinking things through. Maybe that's a good quality, maybe it's a flaw. But either way, I decided to play the long game. I wanted to understand what was happening before I made any moves. I hired a private investigator. Yeah, I know that probably sounds dramatic, but I needed to know the truth, and I wasn't sure I could handle finding it myself. The PI delivered, all right. He gave me the details. Who the guy was, his name's Greg, by the way, how long it had been going on, at least 3 years at the time, and where they usually met, his apartment across town. I didn't confront her then either. Why? Because of Emily. Our daughter was 14 at the time, right on the cusp of high school, and I couldn't bring myself to tear our family apart. I couldn't bear the thought of putting her through a messy divorce, of making her choose between us. So I kept quiet. I buried it. But I started planning. Which brings us to today. This morning, I took that grainy photo, the one of Jenny kissing Greg, and slid it into a photo frame. Not just any frame, though. This one is part of a wall display in our living room. A collection of photos that I've been meticulously curating over the years. Every year on our anniversary, I'd swap out one of the photos and replace it with a new one. A tradition Jenny loved. It was a visual timeline of our life together. Our wedding day, our honeymoon, the birth of Emily, vacations, anniversaries, little moments that captured our life as a couple. There are 20 frames in total. Today is our 20th anniversary. Tonight, I plan to give Jenny the last photo, the one of her and Greg. I know some of you are probably wondering why I didn't confront her sooner, why I let this go on for so long. To be honest, I've asked myself the same thing. Part of it was for Emily's sake, but part of it was fear. Fear of losing everything we'd built, of shattering the image of the life we had. And now, I'm sitting here staring at this photo wall, wondering if I've completely lost my mind. Is this cruel? Is it justice? I don't even know anymore. All I know is that when Jenny walks into the living room tonight, she's going to see it. She's going to see 19 years of memories, and then, at the end, she's going to see the truth. I have no idea how she's going to react. I have no idea how I'm going to react. But one thing's for sure. Our lives are never going to be the same after tonight. What would you do in this case? Or maybe I'm doing something wrong. When Jenny walked into the living room that evening, the tension was so thick I could feel it pressing against my chest. She was carrying a plate of hors d'oeuvres, something she always did when we had our anniversary nights at home. It was such a normal sight, her in her soft blue dress, the one I always said matched her eyes, moving around the room with ease. If I didn't know better, I might have thought she was genuinely happy. I poured us both a glass of wine, masking my shaking hands by gripping the bottle tightly. I didn't sit down. I just leaned against the mantel, staring at the photo wall like it was a window into another world, one where everything made sense. "Mike," Jenny said, her voice light, "you're awfully quiet tonight." I smiled faintly and took a sip of wine. "Just reflecting," she chuckled, oblivious to the storm brewing. "Well, I think we've earned a little reflection after 20 years. Don't you?" She gestured toward the photo wall. "I was just looking at those earlier. God, we've had such a beautiful life that almost broke me." My jaw clenched as I forced down the lump in my throat. "Yeah," I said, my voice low. "We have." Her eyes narrowed slightly, catching something in my tone. Jenny's always been perceptive. "Are you okay?" she asked, stepping closer. I cleared my throat and nodded toward the wall. "Why don't you take a look at the last one? The new edition." Her face lit up with curiosity. She loved this tradition. She set down her wine and moved toward the wall, tilting her head to scan the frames. Her fingers trailed lightly across the photos, pausing briefly on one of our wedding day before moving to the final frame. Then she froze. Her fingers hovered in midair as her eyes locked onto the picture of her and Greg. Her expression was a study in contrasts. Shock, confusion, and then the creeping realization of what she was looking at. For a moment, it felt like time stopped. She didn't breathe. Neither did I. Finally, she turned to me, her face pale. "Mike, what is this?" I kept my voice calm, though it took every ounce of strength to do so. "You tell me." Her mouth opened and closed like she was struggling to find words. I don't understand." "Don't," I interrupted, my voice sharper than I intended. "Don't lie to me. Not now." She took a step back, her hands trembling. "It's not what it looks like." "Oh, really?" I snapped, finally letting some of my anger surface. "Because it looks like my wife of 20 years has been sneaking around with another man. For 3 years. Does that sound about right?" Her eyes widened. "Mike, you've got this all wrong." "Wrong?" I laughed bitterly, shaking my head. "Jenny, I know everything. I know about Greg. I know about the dinners, the late nights, the lies. I even know about his apartment." Her face crumpled, and she sank onto the couch, burying her face in her hands. For a moment, I thought she might start crying, but when she looked up, her eyes were dry. "I didn't mean for it to happen," she whispered. There it was, the admission, even though I'd known the truth for months. Hearing her say it felt like a knife to the chest. "Then why did it?" I demanded, my voice breaking despite myself. "Why, Jenny? What did I do wrong?" She shook her head fiercely. "It wasn't you, Mike. It was never about you. That just made it worse." "Don't give me that," I shouted, my composure finally snapping. "You don't get to sit there and tell me it wasn't about me. You had an affair. You lied to me, to Emily, to everyone. How is that not about me? Her lip quivered as she looked away, unable to meet my gaze. I was lonely. Lonely? My voice dripped with disbelief. Lonely? We built a life together. We have a daughter. How could you be lonely? You don't understand, she said quietly. You've always been so steady, Mike. So reliable. But somewhere along the way, it felt like we stopped being us. You were so focused on providing, on making everything perfect, and I felt invisible. Invisible? I repeated, stunned. Jenny, I loved you. I still do, even now. How could you not see that? Tears finally spilled down her cheeks, and she covered her face again. I didn't want to hurt you. I swear I didn't. It just happened. I sank into a chair, my head in my hands. That's not good enough, I said, my voice barely audible. That's not an excuse. I know, she sobbed. I know it's not. For a while, we just sat there in silence, the weight of the moment crushing us both. When I finally looked up, her face was streaked with tears, and she looked broken. But part of me wondered if she was crying because she was sorry or because she'd been caught. Do you love him? I asked, my voice trembling. She didn't answer right away, and when she finally did, it felt like the floor dropped out from under me. I don't know, she said. I thought I did, but now, I don't know. I laughed bitterly. Well, that makes one of us. Because I thought I knew you, but now? I don't know either. We sat there for hours going back and forth, rehashing every moment that led us here. She begged for forgiveness, swearing it was over with Greg, that she'd end it for good. But her words felt hollow, like an echo in an empty room. By the time we finally went to bed, the question still hung in the air. Could I ever forgive her? The house was silent, except for the hum of the fridge in the kitchen. I wandered back into the living room, unable to sleep, and that's when I saw it. A letter, folded neatly, tucked under the same photo frame. It hadn't been there before. It was addressed to me, and the handwriting wasn't Jenny's. I stared at the letter like it might burst into flames in my hands. My first thought was that it had to be from Greg. But why would he leave something for me? And when? My mind raced with possibilities, each more absurd than the last. I ripped it open, the paper trembling in my hands. The note was short, just a few lines, written in jagged, hurried script. Mike, asterisk, I need to talk to you. There's more to this than you know, asterisk. No signature. Nothing to indicate who it was from. But the message was clear. Whoever wrote it thought they had something important to tell me. My first instinct was anger, hot and raw. I wanted to crumple the letter, throw it in the trash, and never think about it again. What could anyone possibly say that would change the fact that Jenny had betrayed me? That she'd spent years sneaking around behind my back while I was building a life for us? For Emily? But then the doubt crept in. What didn't I know? I sat there for hours, the letter lying limp in my hands. Jenny was asleep upstairs, or at least pretending to be, and the house felt impossibly empty, even though we were both still in it. I replayed every moment of the night in my head, every word Jenny had said, her tears, her excuses, her hollow promises. I felt like I was cycling through every emotion at once. Rage, confusion, betrayal, sadness, even guilt. Had I really made her feel invisible? Had I been so focused on providing that I missed the signs she was slipping away? It was a gut punch to even consider. But as much as I hated to admit it, Jenny wasn't wrong about everything. I had been focused on work, on stability, on the future. I'd assumed that as long as I was checking all the right boxes, husband, father, provider, that everything else would take care of itself. But I wasn't the only one in this marriage. That realization hit me hard. The anger didn't fade, it was too deep, too fresh. But it became something else. A kind of sadness that settled in my chest like a weight I couldn't shake. I thought about the woman I married, the girl who used to laugh until she cried at my dumb jokes, the partner who stood by me through every struggle. And then I thought about Greg, about the life Jenny had been living behind my back, the secrets, the lies. I thought about Emily, blissfully unaware of the cracks spreading through the foundation of her family. That was the hardest part, thinking about what this would do to her. By the time the sun started to rise, I still hadn't moved from the couch. The letter was still in my hands, its cryptic message gnawing at the edges of my mind. I didn't know who had written it or what they wanted to tell me, but I couldn't ignore it. If there was more to this story, I needed to know. Jenny came downstairs later that morning, her eyes red and puffy from crying. She tried to talk to me again, but I couldn't bring myself to engage. My emotions were too raw, and the letter had thrown me completely off balance. "I'm going out," I said flatly, grabbing my keys. "Mike, please," she said, her voice breaking. "Can we just talk?" "Not now," I cut her off. "I need time." I didn't wait for her response. I just walked out the door, got in the car, and drove. The next few days were a blur. I went to work, came home, avoided Jenny as much as possible. Emily noticed the tension, of course. She's a smart kid, but I didn't know how to explain what was happening without shattering her world. Meanwhile, the letter burned a hole in my thoughts. I kept it tucked in the drawer of my bedside table, taking it out every so often to stare at the words, hoping they'd reveal some hidden meaning. And then, a week later, my phone buzzed with a text. It was from an unknown number. *, meet me at the coffee shop on 8th and Maple. Tonight at 7. It's about Jenny *. I sat there, staring at the screen, my heart pounding. I didn't recognize the number, but I knew I couldn't ignore the message. When I arrived at the coffee shop, I scanned the room, looking for anyone who seemed out of place. That's when I saw him. A man sitting in the corner, his back to the wall, his eyes scanning the room nervously. It was Greg. My fists clenched at my sides as I walked over to him. He looked up as I approached, his face pale and drawn. He didn't look like the smug homewrecker I'd pictured in my mind. He looked scared. "Mike," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "Thank you for coming. Why am I here?" I asked coldly, sitting down across from him. He glanced around, like he was afraid someone might overhear us. "I don't know how to say this," he began, "but you need to know the truth about Jenny. About why this all happened." I leaned forward, my jaw tight. "Spit it out." He hesitated, running a hand through his hair. "She didn't tell you, did she?" "Tell me what?" Greg took a deep breath, his hands trembling. He was clearly nervous, his fingers tapping anxiously on the table as he struggled to find the words. "Mike," he finally said, his voice uneven. "There's no easy way to say this, but Jenny's pregnant. It's mine." For a moment, the world seemed to tilt. My stomach churned, my pulse pounded in my ears, and my grip on the edge of the table tightened until my knuckles turned white. "What did you just say?" I asked, my voice dangerously quiet. Greg swallowed hard. "She told me a few weeks ago. We've been trying to figure out what to do, but then she messaged me saying you'd found out. She was panicking, and I thought you needed to know." The air around me seemed to thin, my mind racing as I tried to process what he was saying. "You thought I needed to know?" I spat, my voice rising. "You thought I needed to hear this from you?" Greg shrank back in his chair, his hands raised defensively. "I wasn't trying to make things worse. I didn't know what else to do. That's why I left the note." His words hit me like a sledgehammer. "The note?" Greg nodded. "Yeah. I put it under the photo on the wall. I thought it was the only way to get your attention without making things worse between you and Jenny." "You went into my house?" I hissed, leaning forward, my hands pressing into the table. He flinched but nodded. "I had a key." My heart stopped. "What do you mean you had a key?" Greg hesitated, clearly regretting his decision to confess. "Jenny gave me one. A duplicate. We made it months ago just in case I ever needed to, get in." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. Jenny had given him a key to our home, to the place we'd built together, where we were raising Emily. She'd let this man, a man she was cheating on me with, walk freely into my life without me even knowing. I stood up abruptly, my chair scraping against the floor. My hands were shaking, and my vision blurred with a red haze of rage and disbelief. "You need to leave," I said through gritted teeth. "Right now, before I do something we'll both regret." Greg nodded quickly, standing up and backing away. "Mike, I'm sorry. I just thought—" "Get out," I roared, drawing the attention of the other patrons in the coffee shop. He turned and hurried out the door, leaving me standing there, my fists clenched at my sides and my mind spinning with everything he just told me. Jenny was pregnant. Greg had a key. And suddenly, I realized I couldn't trust anything about the life I thought I knew. I drove home in a daze, Greg's words replaying in my head like a broken record. Jenny's pregnant. He had a key. They'd made a duplicate behind my back. By the time I pulled into the driveway, my emotions had cycled through rage, disbelief, and an aching sadness. But now I felt something new, clarity. I couldn't keep avoiding this. I couldn't keep tiptoeing around the wreckage of my marriage, hoping it would magically fix itself. The truth was out, and now I had to decide what to do with it. Jenny was in the kitchen when I walked in, sipping a cup of tea. She froze when she saw me, her eyes darting nervously to the clock like she was surprised I'd come home so soon. "Mike," she said softly, setting down her mug. "Where were you?" "I saw Greg," I said bluntly, my voice devoid of emotion. Her face paled, and her hands gripped the counter for support. You talked to him?" "Yes," I said, stepping closer. "And he told me everything. The pregnancy, the key, the note, all of it." Jenny's mouth opened, then closed again, her eyes filling with tears. "I was gonna tell you, Mike. I swear I was. I didn't know how." "Didn't know how?" I repeated, my voice rising. "You've had years to come clean, Jenny. Years to tell me the truth. And instead, you chose to lie. You gave him a key to our house, our home. Do you have any idea how humiliating that is for me?" Tears streamed down her face, but I didn't care. She'd betrayed me in the worst possible way, and now she was crying like she was the victim. "I made mistakes," she admitted, her voice shaking. "Terrible mistakes. But, Mike, it wasn't because I didn't love you. I do love you. I always have." I laughed bitterly, shaking my head. "You've got a funny way of showing it." She stepped closer, reaching for my hand, but I pulled away. "Mike, please." I was scared. I didn't want to lose you. I didn't want to lose us. "You lost me the second you gave him that key," I said coldly. Jenny collapsed into a chair, her sobs racking her body. I watched her for a moment, a part of me wanting to comfort her despite everything. But I couldn't. Not anymore. "I can't do this," I said finally, my voice breaking. She looked up at me, her eyes wide with panic. "What do you mean?" "I mean, I'm done, Jenny. I can't be in a marriage where there's no trust, where I'm constantly looking over my shoulder, wondering what other secrets you're hiding." "Mike, no," she pleaded, rushing toward me. "We can fix this. I'll do anything. Counseling, therapy, whatever it takes. Please don't give up on us." Her desperation was palpable, and for a moment, I hesitated. I thought about Emily, about the life we'd built, about the 20 years of memories we shared. But then I thought about the lies, the betrayal, and the man who'd walked freely into my house while I was none the wiser. "I'm sorry, Jenny," I said, my voice firm, "but this marriage is over." The days that followed were a whirlwind of painful conversations and difficult decisions. I told Jenny I wanted a divorce. She begged me to reconsider, but I held my ground. We agreed to wait until after the holidays to tell Emily, not wanting to ruin her Christmas. In the meantime, I stayed in the guest room, avoiding Jenny as much as possible. It was awkward and tense, but it felt like the only way to move forward. I also reached out to a lawyer, starting the process of separating our finances and preparing for what was sure to be a contentious divorce. The pregnancy complicated things, of course, but Greg assured me he was ready to take responsibility. As for Emily, I struggled with how to tell her the truth. She deserved to know what was happening, but I didn't want to burden her with the details of her mother's affair. One night, as I sat in the guest room going over paperwork, I heard a soft knock at the door. I opened it to find Emily standing there, her eyes red and puffy. "Dad," she said quietly, "is everything okay?" I hesitated, my heart breaking at the sight of her. "Come in," I said, motioning for her to sit on the bed. She sat down, pulling her knees to her chest. "You and Mom have been acting weird," she said. "Like, really weird. Is something wrong?" I sighed, running a hand through my hair. "Emily, your mom and we're going through a tough time right now." Her eyes filled with tears. "Are you getting a divorce?" The question hit me like a punch to the gut. "We haven't made any final decisions yet," I said carefully. "But we're trying to figure out what's best for everyone." Emily nodded, her tears spilling over. "I don't want you guys to split up." "I know," I said, pulling her into a hug. "I don't want to hurt you, sweetheart. But sometimes, grown-ups, we make mistakes. And those mistakes have consequences." She clung to me, her sobs muffled against my chest. I held her tightly, my own tears threatening to fall. In that moment, I realized how much this was going to affect her, and it only strengthened my resolve to handle the situation with as much care as possible. For Emily's sake, I would do everything in my power to make this transition as smooth as I could. A few days later, as I packed a bag to stay with a friend temporarily, I found something tucked away in the back of my closet. A small box filled with old love letters Jenny had written to me when we first started dating. I sat down on the floor and read through them, my heart aching with every word. The love we'd shared had been real once. And even now, despite everything, a part of me still loved her. But love wasn't enough anymore. As I closed the box and stood up, I made a promise to myself. I would rebuild my life. Not for Jenny, not for Greg, but for me and Emily. And as I walked out the door, leaving behind the life I'd once thought was perfect, I felt a strange sense of peace. Because for the first time in a long time, I knew exactly where I stood. The day Jenny left was surreal. It was like watching the final thread of a once vibrant tapestry being pulled loose, unraveling what was left of the life we'd built together. She didn't fight me when I said I wanted to stay in the house with Emily. If anything, she seemed relieved. "I think it's for the best," she said quietly, standing in the doorway with her suitcase in hand. I nodded, too emotionally drained to respond. Emily hovered near the staircase, her face a mix of anger, sadness, and confusion. She hadn't said much since we told her about the divorce, but her silence spoke volumes. Jenny knelt down and reached out to Emily. "I'm so sorry, sweetie. I love you so much. You know that, right?" Emily didn't move. She just stared at her mother, her jaw tight. "If you love me, why are you leaving?" Jenny's face crumpled, and for a moment, I almost stepped in. Almost. But this was between them, and I knew Emily needed to say her piece. "It's complicated," Jenny said, her voice trembling. "But I'll always be here for you, no matter what." Emily said nothing. When Jenny finally left, the house felt different. Quieter, emptier, yet strangely lighter. The weight of the past few months, the tension and secrets, had lifted, leaving behind a bittersweet sense of relief. For the first few weeks, the house felt like a ghost of its former self. Every room carried memories of Jenny. Her favorite chair in the living room, the smell of her perfume lingering in the bedroom. I considered selling the place, starting fresh somewhere else, but Emily was adamant. "This is our home, Dad," she said one night as we ate dinner at the kitchen table. "I don't want to leave." Her words hit me hard. The house wasn't just bricks and mortar to her. It was a sanctuary, a link to the life she'd always known. So I stayed. For her. We began to make small changes, reclaiming the space as our own. Emily helped me repaint the walls in the living room, choosing a soft sage green to replace the beige Jenny had loved. We donated old furniture, rearranged rooms, and planted new flowers in the garden. With each change, the house felt a little less haunted and a little more like home. Jenny moved in with Greg not long after she left. The pregnancy progressed smoothly, and while the thought of her starting a new family still stung, I forced myself to focus on what mattered: Emily. She struggled at first, of course. Seeing her mother with Greg, at school events, in photos on social media, was a constant reminder of everything we'd lost. But slowly, she started to open up, both to me and to a counselor I'd found for her. One night, as we sat on the couch watching a movie, she turned to me out of nowhere. "Do you hate Mom?" she asked. I paused, considering my answer carefully. "No," I said finally. "I don't hate her. I'm hurt by what she did, but I don't hate her. She's still your mom, and she'll always be a part of your life." Emily nodded slowly, leaning her head on my shoulder. "I don't hate her either. I'm just mad." "That's okay," I said, wrapping my arm around her. "You're allowed to feel that way. Just remember, no matter what, you've got me." Over time, the pain softened, though it never completely disappeared. Jenny and I managed to maintain a civil relationship for Emily's sake, exchanging updates and coordinating schedules without much drama. One day, as we sat in a coffee shop discussing Emily's upcoming school play, Jenny surprised me. "Thank you," she said suddenly. "For what?" I asked, genuinely confused. "For taking care of her," she said, her voice tinged with regret. "For being the parent she needs even when I couldn't." I didn't know how to respond, so I just nodded. There wasn't much else to say. But there is one thing I can say for sure. Protect what matters most. For me, that was Emily. Every decision I made, staying in the house, putting aside my anger, was for her. If you have kids, prioritize their well-being above everything else. Healing takes time. There were days when I thought I'd never feel whole again, but bit by bit, the wounds began to close. Be patient with yourself. Let go of the need for control. You can't change what's already happened. The only thing you can control is how you respond. Redefine your life. When everything falls apart, it's an opportunity to rebuild. Not the same life, but a new one that reflects who you are now. Emily and I are closer than ever now. She's thriving in school, her laughter filling the house in a way I never thought possible after everything we went through. As for me, I've started dating again. Nothing serious yet, but I'm open to the possibility of love. I've learned that life doesn't end with heartbreak. It just changes course. And the house? It's ours now, filled with new memories, new traditions, and a sense of peace I never thought I'd find. If there's one thing I've learned, it's this: no matter how devastating the storm, you can always rebuild. You might not end up with the same house, but sometimes what you create in the aftermath is even stronger. What would you have done in my situation? Stayed and tried to rebuild the marriage for the sake of your family, or walked away to start fresh like I did?